Mindy Shire, Runway of Dreams.
Runway of Dreams.
Runway of Dreams.
Try to dress yourself with stiff muscles, with fists instead of having digits to help you, and see how difficult it is to dress yourself.
Her mother and fashion designer, Mindy Shire.
How does this come about with such a mainstream brand?
I would love to use our most recent launch with Victoria's Secret as an example, because
And very special news, her son Oliver.
when Oliver was born with this form of muscular dystrophy, it really made everyday tasks such as dressing yourself very, very difficult.
Why was it so important to you to wear jeans?
Because everyone else was, or everyone else could, so like, why was I any different?
Hi, Mindy. It's really fantastic having you on the podcast. I am super excited to chat about all the updates because, as we were saying before, we've last chatted, I don't know, like 2 years ago. But I've been seeing everything you're doing with Victoria's Secret, Gamut Mangement, obviously, which is really like the main reason why we are chatting, and Runway of Dreams. So if you can just take us on the journey of how this all started, what is your journey? And yeah, how did this all begin?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I always love talking to you and supporting all the amazing work that you're doing. So my journey actually started 18 years ago when my son Oliver was born with a rare form of muscular dystrophy. I am a fashion designer by trade, and when Oliver was born with this form of muscular dystrophy, it really made everyday tasks such as dressing yourself very, very difficult for him in terms of doing buttons and zippers, putting pants over his leg braces, etc. So the irony of the fact that there's nothing I love more than getting dressed every day, for Oliver, it was a daily reminder of what he could not do. And so when he was of school age, my husband and I decided that he really needed to wear sweatpants every day because it would be the only way he would be able to go to the bathroom on his own, put the pants over his leg braces, etc. So it felt okay, as stereotypical as this sounds. You know, we thought he was a boy, he really wouldn't care what he looked like, what he dressed like. And Oliver very quickly proved us wrong when he came home at 8 years old and said, "Mom, I want to wear jeans, and I don't understand why everybody else gets to wear jeans except for me." And to be honest, it was a real kick in the stomach moment, not only as a mom, but also somebody that had dedicated her career to the fashion industry, that I needed my 8-year-old to remind me of how important and how powerful clothing is to who you are as a person and how you show up in this world. So I looked at that little 8-year-old face and I said, you bet you're wearing jeans to school tomorrow. So you better go to sleep because it's going to be a huge day tomorrow. And truthfully, I sat at my kitchen table for the first hour or so and just cried my eyeballs out that I missed it. I really missed it. And I ripped apart a pair of his jeans, put them back together with probably the worst designing I'd ever done, with peel and stick Velcro, some creative stitching. But the next day, when Oliver was able to independently dress himself for the first time in his life with anything that had buttons in it, it was a true epiphany that happened in my life and most certainly his, that I saw a transformation come over him of true confidence. He was holding his head a little higher, and all because of a pair of jeans. And that moment opened my eyes to the fact that if Oliver was struggling with this at 8 years old, how in the world did the 1.8 billion people on our planet, the largest minority in the world, people with disabilities, how were they managing clothing challenges? So this was back in 2013, 14, and I decided to take my background, have a small goal, I say that very sarcastically, of changing the fashion industry to be inclusive of people with disabilities, and Runway of Dreams Foundation was born. And the true mission of Runway of Dreams was to raise awareness to the need for mainstream adaptive product and also inclusion of people with disabilities as consumers. And the way that we did that is playing in the largest sandbox in the world, and that's New York Fashion Week. And we hosted fashion shows during that time that really put a spotlight on people with disabilities. They were the only talent that was on the runway, all different shapes, sizes, abilities, ages, all people with disabilities. And what they wore on the runway was, in 2016, we partnered with Tommy Hilfiger and made fashion history by developing the first ever mainstream adaptive clothing line, which is now Tommy Adaptive. What that partnership did was really open the floodgates to so many other brands, even other industries such as the entertainment industry, that started reaching out to Runway of Dreams and saying, well, we want to get involved in the adaptive space. How do we include people with disabilities in everything from product to being on runways or in ad campaigns, etc.? And the amount of requests that we were getting made it so clear that a second company needed to be born. And in 2019, Gamut Management was created as the first of its kind consulting and talent community that exclusively focused on adaptive product and apparel, and any consumer products. And the way that we did that was including people with disabilities at every step of the value chain. And we pulled from our talent community to really do that. The third part of what Gamut produced was the first of its kind certification mark called the Gamut Seal of Approval. That was the identifier to the population that this product or service was approved, vetted, and developed within for people with disabilities.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for taking us through that journey. I think there's quite a few things to pick there, like in terms of, firstly, obviously, congratulations on actually making it happen, because really when you said it was like a dream, like, yeah, I'm gonna change the world, these are things that we all love to say, but not all of us get to actually do. So you did manage to do that, and you're still doing that from what I can obviously see. But yeah, the other thing really is the fact that you said when it came to coming up with the adaptive lines with Tommy Hilfiger, you included the people with disabilities across the supply chain. And that is super interesting because obviously, for the listeners or the viewers, obviously both Mindy and I don't have any disabilities, but actually the fact that we are needing to work with individuals with that, and having the knowledge obviously from your son and also my brothers as well, it's really just kind of closing that circle, I think, really, with the fashion design expertise, plus also the actual knowledge of the different disabilities as well.
Absolutely. There is, and I say this with myself included, there really is no way to get into the adaptive space authentically without including people with disabilities at every step of the value chain. It's an impossibility.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think what's really interesting there is that Tommy Hilfiger themselves did that. It's a little behind the scenes that you've given us there. Yeah. Can you take us a bit more through that? Because I think our listeners will really be interested in how does this come about with such a mainstream brand who normally, not necessarily Tommy Hilfiger, but any mainstream brand who won't necessarily think of that just by themselves. So how do they now come to the point of changing things and actually making it happen?
Well, I would love to use our most recent launch with Victoria's Secret as an example, because they really, really did it well. And I'd like to say, are really a gold standard of a company that took their time to methodically get into the adaptive space. So to your point, Vaughn, nobody wakes up one day and says, let's get into the adaptive space. It really it doesn't work like that. I hope that they're waking up, which is being proven by the amount of brands that are in the adaptive space now and saying we're missing the boat. We're not really providing product or services for everyone because people with disabilities are not being included in this conversation. And that's really at the point that Victoria's Secret came to Gamut with the knowledge that they are not serving all their customers, that they are missing out on a huge part of the population that identifies with having a disability, identifies as a woman, and really wants to wear the same product as everyone else. So with that real vulnerability, I would say, is how they approached coming to Gamut. And the way that we always like to start with any brands that are at that point of just beginning, it's always education and really understanding who they are designing for and the population at large, the size, the spending power, the difference in different types of disabilities. And the best way to do that is to introduce them to the population. And that's exactly where we started. So actually over 200 women with all different types of disabilities, ethnicities, ages, were really involved in the creation of the adaptive collection now at Victoria's Secret and Pink, with that community at large, but also having a very focused group of women. I believe there were about 12 of them that truly were on the journey from the beginning in educating, in helping the teams understand the different types of disabilities, size, inclusion, all of that, because that is a cross section with disability. That, for example, those that use a wheelchair 24 hours a day, because of gravity, the inability for muscles to gain strength, their body can change in that, from possibly the bottom part of their body being larger than the top because they're sitting every day. So that's, a nuance that the team and certainly the designers and product development teams really needed to understand how disability can affect different body shapes. At the same time, we were working internally with the team at Victoria's Secret, HR, customer service, the sales team, because they needed to truly understand this consumer as much as the product development team did. And that is something that we at Gamut really stand by in our foundational principles, that if a company is getting into the adaptive space, they really need to approach it internally and externally. And that is really exactly what Victoria's Secret did as they were on the journey of adaptive. So really for the first 3 months, it was really understanding the consumer, really getting a sense of all the things that I just mentioned before we even started talking about product. And that, I think, is a really important piece of it. And then taking them through the journey, the evolution of what it takes to develop the product and what it takes for a company to be internally ready for a go-to-market.
Really end to end from what I can see. You've really started from HR, obviously recruitment is already another issue in itself when it comes to inclusivity. And then here we also now have, all the way now to product from what you were saying. So yeah, again, we're really just closing that loop. But I can imagine with all of that, there could be some challenges, not necessarily just with Victoria's Secret, but just that whole process with all the brands that you've worked with. Can you take us through some of what those challenges could be?
Absolutely. And I think that's equally as important to talk about the challenges as it is the successes. So I would say starting from kind of back in 2015, 16, there were 0 mainstream brands in the adaptive space, absolutely none. So to approach an industry and say, you're missing out on a huge part of the population and a business opportunity. I was constantly receiving feedback to say, Well, if nobody's done it before, there must be a reason. So good luck to you. We'll root for you on the sidelines, but we cannot take a risk in something that nobody's done before. Fortunately, the team at Tommy saw it quite differently, that this was an opportunity to be a leader and a pioneer in this space, but it is something that is continually a challenge in helping an industry or even other industries. And, certainly I would say this from also an entrepreneurial perspective of helping educate that just because something had been done in a certain way doesn't mean it's the only way. And that
Fashion has a problem with that.
Yeah, I had to really, and still to this day, truly, everything from product development to marketing to advertising. This is an industry that's very rooted in their ways and the type of bodies that they're designing for. I mean, thankfully, we have a built-in case study of plus size in the industry, really, approaching that now as a different body type, a different body shape, and really including that in the size inclusivity. And I love that has kind of changed from plus size to size inclusivity. It's really the same principles, but nonetheless, it doesn't make it easier. It's gotten a little easier with now having many mainstream brands in the adaptive space, but nonetheless, when we are starting from the beginning of educating, it's helping brands understand that this is very much a business opportunity, white space, and that people with disabilities are in fact consumers that have not been included in the conversation. And the reality is, this is a statement that does help to change the conversation, is that anyone can be a part of the population of people with disabilities at any point in their life. You cannot say that about any other minority. It's a fact that whether it's an accident, whether that it is just aging, the reality is probably the greater part of our population will need adaptive or universal products at some point in their life, period. And that getting over that hump of, change is good. Change and inclusion of more people to be able to wear the same products, because you are, for example, putting magnets behind the button instead of a typical button closure, is change for the better.
Yeah, these are really small changes that I feel like a lot of brands really overlook, and they're like, no, I don't know if it's because they just can't be bothered, or is it that, they just don't see the point in it. Because even when I was first developing like my brand, all the time I'm hearing literally what you mentioned earlier, this like, oh, great idea, but yeah, we're not really for us, that kind of sentiment. So yeah, that can be really frustrating when you're really just, there's potential, these are the numbers, these are the potential things that you can do with the designs. But hey, that's really like what you said. We have a standardized industry of fashion. I thought it was just Paris, because Paris is very fixed on traditional ways of, making, craftsmanship, etc. But I think it is pretty global from what you said.
It's absolutely global. I mean, let's just even take the button and the buttonhole. Do you know when it was first developed? It was developed in the 13th century. That is the first indication that we saw that that is how people were closing their clothing. The fact that we are still using that
Exactly.
in 2023, when we literally run our lives through this thing, is extraordinary, and such a perfect case study of how and why we need to make change happen in the industry.
Yeah, most definitely. And that goes with many things, even like pockets and things, even like for women's wear, for example. I think many of us will struggle with zips on the back of dresses, etc. That's always like one of my lines that even able-bodied people will struggle with clothing, because everything's so conventional and it's never changing. But I think what is really great about your story is that you did manage to convince these really mainstream large brands to actually fix something. And with something like that, did you notice maybe a common feature that they were willing to do? Because you touched upon HR and obviously, I guess, design in this case. I'm not sure how much you got involved with the design. But yeah, which features are they really willing to change?
Well, from the perspective of, let's go with mainstream, different than if you started your own line, like you. The thought around it was modifying what already exists to make it easier for more people to be able to dress themselves. So is it going to be perfect for every disability out there? Probably not. Is it going to make it easier for, hopefully, all disabilities out there? Probably. And with that mindset, it really came down to 3 categories that across the board, and this came through extensive research, focus groups, surveys, etc., was first, as I mentioned before, was closures. It closures, buttons, snaps, hook and eyes, and in many cases zippers, are really, really difficult for both cognitive and physical disabilities across the board. So thinking about alternate ways to open and close a product was number 1. Number 2 was the adjustability of the product. So waistbands, sleeve lengths, pant lengths to adjust to different shaped bodies was another category that became very, very clear in the research that would make it easier for people to wear the same products. And the third category was rethinking the way that the product is put on and off the body. So for example, what I'm wearing, which is something that you had to put over your head, there's no openers or closures on it, but it does require strength to pull over my head, to manipulate arms through and armholes. And if you are a part of the population that will never be able to independently dress yourself because of your disability and have to be dressed by someone else, that's a really challenging process. You know, I always like to encourage an audience to really try to dress yourself with stiff muscles and or no, with fists instead of having digits to help you, and see how difficult it is to dress yourself, and think about the amount of time that this part of the population is spending either being dressed or with difficulty being dressed. So thinking about easier ways to get the product on and off the body. So even just starting from those 3 categories and taking the products, these are things that we worked directly with design teams on. And because I always like to say this, that we like to teach how to fish. We don't want to give you the fish. We want you to learn how to fish in your way, your company designs with your target demographic, not take you to the end result of providing the fish for you. That is really our methodology at Gamut. And within those categories, even just starting there can help bring in so many more people to be able to wear the same products.
In this case, would you say that the feedback for these changes has been generally positive? And without naming brands, have you got kind of specific figures of how well these shirts are doing, maybe, for example, that have been replaced with magnets, etc.? And I am also asking this just because when doing the research, I've seen that in the US, it seems like there's obviously a lot more happening with the adaptive scene. But then with smaller brands, though, like mine, we're kind of in this space where it is a little bit of a struggle to really push these brands just because of pricing or, you know, those kind of things. So actually, generally, with that feedback, have you received anything similar with these brands as a whole? Not naming any, unless if you can.
Well, I can say that as evidenced by the fact that in 2016, there was one mainstream brand that started, Tommy Hilfiger. Here we are in 2023, and I had 11 mainstream brands on our runway for Runway of Dreams, and that we are in different ways are working with through Gamut. In kind of the years of fashion, that is an extraordinary time frame that so many brands have come on board. And that is evidence that, as we know from being in the industry, brands do not get involved in something that ultimately isn't going to serve their brand or lean into their bottom line. They just won't. So I think that's the first piece of evidence. And the second is that this is an evolution, and certainly kind of going back to the case study of Victoria's Secret. When we first started with them, we made it very, very clear that this is step one. Nobody comes out of the gate and says, nailed it, we did it, that there's no further modifications or changes or tweaks or whatnot that we have to make. It will constantly be an evolution. And that is something that the population is so good at, is giving feedback. And the brands that are in the space are doing such an amazing job in hearing that feedback and implementing that feedback. So, where Tommy, for example, started, they're so much more developed now, 7 years later, and still being in the adaptive space, and what they have improved, developed, curated, all of that. And it's because of the feedback from the population. Now, to go back to what you mentioned about the smaller brands, that is another reason why I felt that it was so critically important to go after mainstream brands, because we all know in the world of the fashion industry, it's a trickle down, in that we need the big guys to be in the space and create a category of adaptive and universal products, because that opens the door for small brands to come in and hopefully thrive as this becomes a bigger and bigger and more important category that our world accepts. And that's why I'm going to do whatever I can and certainly inspire future designers and students and whatnot to make this a part of our mainstream world. And hopefully these conversations don't need to happen anymore, because it's just is that adaptive and universal is a part of our mainstream vernacular. It is a part of the fashion industry. It's a category solidly that I really believe we are on our way to making happen.
Yeah, and I think that is really great in the US specifically, because that's where I'm seeing a lot of the stuff. And funny enough, whenever I do see all of this growth, you're always kind of behind it, really. From that, I think you also did something with LVMH as well at some point, and it keeps growing. And we haven't actually mentioned as well Runway of Dreams. You've done so much with that. I guess, that could lead us to the next question, because that's probably one of your highlights as well of your journey.
I'm so proud of Runway of Dreams. Actually, 2024 is our 10-year anniversary, which is just phenomenal. That we have made it 10 years. We made it through, a pandemic, and are still here to talk about it. Is the notion that we have solidly included ourselves in the fashion conversation, and particularly Fashion Week, that we were named by Forbes last year as one of the top 5 shows of Fashion Week. And to be considered not, a charitable, cute runway show, but to be considered in the same conversation of the likes of other brands that were touted, top shows, was extraordinary, and really showed how important our work is, and also how seriously the industry is taking our mission. So when we think about the two companies, Runway of Dreams is really solidly the why. That we are showing why consumers with disabilities need to be on runways and why they are so important to the fashion conversation, why it's important for brands to be in the adaptive space. And Gamut has become the how, but they work together. They work so beautifully together in really helping the holistic journey. In that, I keep going back to Victoria's Secret because there's such a great example that they utilized Runway of Dreams as the place to launch their adaptive collection. They could have done their own show very well, and made huge, waves, but they felt that it was so important to go to where this population is and where authentically brands have gone to launch their adaptive products, and that's Runway of Dreams. So to be considered that important of a platform is amazing. And I am so, so proud of the work that Runway of Dreams has done.
I'm really excited now that I'll be based in the US. I'll be able to actually physically go to these events now. Yeah.
Consider this your invitation.
Yeah.
We absolutely must have you there.
Yes, most definitely. We'll definitely we'll keep in touch about those future events. But speaking of that, what can we look forward to maybe in the new year? What do you have going on for Runway of Dreams or Gamut Management?
So on the Runway of Dreams side, being that this, again, is our 10-year anniversary, we are really putting together some exciting new projects, starting actually February Fashion Week, which we classically haven't been really involved in. But this year we are putting a new stake in the ground and doing an amazing partnership that we're excited to share but can't yet. So stay tuned for that. But that'll be a great way to kick off the year. And then, of course, leaning into our September show. And actually what we launched last year was the first time we ever did a public exhibit. So very much in the vein of how the Met Gala works, that they do a big event, for the who's who in Hollywood and fashion, that they get to see the exhibit first, and then it opens to the public. Runway of Dreams has really followed that model, that our big show will happen, and then the next day the general public can come in and see the products in a curated exhibit that were on the runway. So it's really, really exciting. So that we will be continuing this year. And for Gamut, I'm really, really excited for everyone to be able to see the new brands that are coming out in the adaptive space in 2024, and really working to make this a part of any brand, whether in fashion or other industries, really understanding that products and services can be modified to make it easier for people with disabilities across the board. And that is something that we are really leaning into this year.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm really looking forward to physically going to these places now that I'm based in the US. So I will be looking out for all of those events, and also the big news that we can't hear just yet. But listeners, also stay tuned to what Gamut Management and Runway of Dreams has, because I know that you do a lot of online streaming as well of some of the shows. So even if you're not based in the US, you can still definitely be in touch. But how else can individuals stay in touch with you, or do you have anything that they can apply to or anything like that?
Well, on the Gamut side, certainly if anyone listening has a disability, wants to get involved in Gamut Management, we would love to have you as part of our community. You can go to gamutmanagement.com and it'll take you through how to become part of Gamut. And certainly follow us on all social platforms. We always, I think, do a good job of kind of recognizing where we are going to be, what's happening. Certainly also on the Runway of Dreams, runwaydreams.org. Also, you can head there and learn about what we're doing, and certainly follow us on social media.
Well, hopefully you'll be seeing some of those followers or listeners coming your way. But until then, continue doing all the fantastic things that you're doing.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
Great to see you.